going to ask people to please keep the table talk down to a minimum. I've had probably 20 people approach me over the break complaining that there's too much talking. And visiting is a very important aspect of our assembly every year. But just go somewhere else and visit during the presentations. There's a lot of people in here that want to hear about this new self-government agreement, the path we're going to take, the work we need to do. And please, out of respect for those people that want to listen or here to listen, please take the table talk elsewhere. Thank you. Our presenter on our self-government agreement workshop is Zachary Davis. Zach is a senior associate with the law firm Pape Salter Taillé, and he's been called to the bar in Alberta for sure, Ontario, a couple provinces. I'm supposed to have a bio for this guy. I'm just making it up as I go. He's worked on a number of self-government, Indigenous rights cases in different communities across Canada, and we're lucky to have him working with us and supporting our self-government process. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you please give Zachary Davis a warm Métis welcome? And I really encourage people to listen, take notes. We're going to have time for questions at the end. So please make sure you take this opportunity, like I said before, to ask questions, take information back home to your relatives, your family, and provide some context the best you can as you go home. So thanks a lot, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor, it's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy coming to the Annual General Assembly, and this is a good news year. There's a lot to celebrate. You've had a hugely successful year, in particular with the signing of the self-government agreement in June. And it is my honor to take some time today and explain to you what is in the agreement, why the agreement is such a milestone, why it's such an achievement that is worthy of celebration, and also what the next step is. And the next big step is developing a constitution. So I'm actually going to go through this in two presentations, and I'm devoting a whole second presentation to the issue of the Constitution because it's so important. But before we get there, I really want to lay a foundation so that everyone is on the same page when we enter that discussion, and you all have in front of mind why this is such an achievement for the nation. So this first presentation...
Hello. Mr. Chair, Mr. Presenter.
Yes.
I moved your mic. So back in here, I don't know if anyone else has a problem, but it's echoing, and so it's kind of hard to hear what you're saying. I don't know if you need to speak closer to that mic. I haven't got a clue, but we want to hear you because this is an important piece.
Thank you very much. If I stand here, can you hear me in the back? That's better? Okay. Closer. If I stand here, is that better? Okay, right on. Thanks for pointing that out. It is flattering that you want to hear me. This is important, so let's get into it. This June, the MNA signed what's called the Métis Government Recognition and Self-Government Agreement with Canada. And it was a huge achievement. It was really the culmination of decades of hard work by MNA citizens and MNA leaders. And to understand just the extent of an achievement that this is, it's really important to understand why these negotiations were taking place at all and the struggle that Métis people had to even get to the negotiating table. That's what sets us up as such a big milestone. So in this first presentation, I want to explain some of the historical context. I also want to walk through the legal battle, we call it the Métis legal odyssey, that led to Canada finally coming to the negotiating table. I want to talk about the negotiations over the last couple of years that got you to the agreement, and then I want to set out what's in the agreement so that you can understand it. So first, the historical context. The story of negotiating self-government starts with the story of Canada in 1867. Before 1867, Métis had self-government. You didn't need to negotiate it. You lived in your homeland, you governed yourselves under the institutions that you made for yourself. That was self-government, non-negotiable. It's when Canada was created as a country and turned its ambitions westward to link the coasts that the idea of having to negotiate self-government was born at all. The mechanism that Canada turned westward was in an agreement to purchase the northwestern territories from the Hudson's Bay Company. And it bought all that land, it's the green land on the map here, from the Hudson's Bay Company, but attached to that purchase was a promise. The promise was that Canada would equitably settle the claims of the native people living in the territory. And Canada did set itself on the path to do that, which is why, when you look at the map of historic treaties, the numbered treaties span through that territory. After Canada is created, they go through the Northwestern Territories and they sign numbered treaties with the First Nations. That is, those treaties have their problems. Those promises want fulfillment as well. But that is how Canada embarked on the path to fulfill the promise of equitable settlement. With the Métis, they took an entirely different tack. In the same territory where the numbered treaties were signed, they go through and they issue scrip to Métis people. Scrip is the subject of an entirely different presentation. It is a fascinating topic. It is, I don't think there's any question that it is the largest land swindle in Canadian history. The Supreme Court has called it a sorry chapter in Canadian history. It did a lot to dispossess Métis across the homeland. And it also set the stage for why the Métis legal odyssey was so difficult. After being issued these coupons that were almost impossible to redeem for land, the Crown, both provincial and federal, took the position that Métis people had no rights. And if Métis people had no rights, they didn't need to be negotiated with anymore. So when the era of modern treaty making arose, it didn't arise in the Métis homeland. It arose on the fringes of where the historic treaties were signed, in the north and in British Columbia. So this is a map of the modern treaties that have been concluded. This is a map of where they're being negotiated, and you'll see that it neglects entirely the center of the country. What we're left with then is a hole in the promise of equitable settlement, right in the heart of the Métis homeland. This is where Métis land rights, where Métis Aboriginal rights continue to exist, and where settlement is required. It appeared in 1982 that the government tactic of ignoring the Métis was about to change. Really what had happened from the issuance of the last scrip until 1982, the federal government had done nothing to assist the Métis. In 1982, the Constitution is changed, and Section 35 is adopted. Section 35 recognizes and affirms the rights of Aboriginal people, the Aboriginal rights of Aboriginal people, and explicitly includes the Métis as one of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. And what's interesting is, that's all that it said. So it was an open promise. The details still needed to be worked out. And the first time that the Supreme Court of Canada had an opportunity to look at the meaning of Section 35, that's what it said. It said the details need to be worked out. But Section 35 provides a solid constitutional base upon which subsequent negotiations can take place. Section 35 was a promise to honor your Indigenous past, a promise on which you could build a future as an Indigenous people, and it was a platform for negotiating that future with Canada. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen because the Crown still refused to deal with you. And there was lots of reasons the Crown refused to deal with you, but there were three main legal reasons. Three hurdles that the Crown put between you and achieving self-government in the modern era. And that is, they said, regardless of what the Constitution says, you have no Aboriginal rights. It said, regardless of what happened in the past, you can't advance your claims against the Crown. And it said, regardless of who you say you are, you're not our problem. You might be somebody's problem, but you're not the federal government's problem. You're a provincial problem. Go talk to Alberta. Until those hurdles were overcome, Canada was never going to come to the table with you. And this is the era of the Métis legal odyssey. This is when Métis people went to court. The first hurdle fell with the Powley decision. So remember, Section 35 says Métis people are Aboriginal people, and Aboriginal people's Aboriginal rights are recognized and confirmed. The Crown said, that can't possibly be right. Aboriginal rights come from pre-existing European contact. The Métis people are a product of European contact, therefore the Métis people have no rights. When this finally got to the Supreme Court of Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada said that was baloney. They recognized that the Constitution means what it says, that Métis people can have Aboriginal rights. The way that we think about that needs to change. The source of those rights isn't pre-existence. The source of those rights is your pre-existence prior to effective European control of your territory, so your existence in the territory prior to Canada moving into it, and the genesis of the Métis as a distinct Indigenous nation, that ethnogenesis of you as a people. But the Supreme Court also said that as we work out exactly what rights you hold as an Indigenous people, Canada needs to negotiate. Section 35 is a platform for negotiation. Still, Canada refused. The next hurdle fell with the Manitoba Métis Federation case. The Manitoba Métis Federation case was about a promise that is specific to Manitoba, the promise of 1.4 million acres of land to the Métis children that was enshrined in the Manitoba Act and for which Louis Riel and his provisional government fought so hard. The Métis children in Manitoba did not get their 1.4 million acres. And what happened was Canada counted them again, distributed land, took it back, distributed scrip. Basically, Canada ragged the puck in good Canadian fashion until Manitoba was filled with white settlers, the Métis had left in the Reign of Terror, and the promise went unfulfilled. When Manitoba attempted to negotiate a settlement of that issue in the early 1980s, Canada wrote back and said, the claim as submitted does not support a valid claim in law. They will not negotiate. So, over decades, the Manitoba Métis Federation went to court. They went to court explicitly not for the land. They weren't asking for the land. They were asking for a declaration to assist in extrajudicial negotiations. And they got that declaration. The Supreme Court of Canada said that the federal crown failed to implement the land grant provision as set out in Section 31 of the Manitoba Act 1870 in accordance with the honor of the crown. And implicit in that is that Canada needs to negotiate a solution. Still, Canada refused. Canada refused because they said, that's all very nice, but Métis problems are not Canada's problems. Métis problems are the province's problems. And this is what the Daniels case was about. Oh, before I move on to the Daniels case, the relevance of the Manitoba Métis Federation case is not limited to Manitoba. It's not limited to Manitoba because the Métis in Manitoba are not the only Métis people with claims against the Crown. Métis in Alberta have a long list of claims that could be advanced against the Crown. The most important of which is probably scrip, but there are others, including the claim flowing from Saint-Paul-des-Métis, which became the town of St. Paul. 110 years ago, the town of St. Paul was established, but it was only established because a reserve that was established for Métis people in the 1890s was given away to French-Canadian settlers. and taken away from the Métis. There's a strong basis for a need for reconciliation around the history of this very town. And there are other stories like that in Alberta. The rescinded colonies that were set aside and that never became Métis settlements under the modern Métis Settlement Act. The Cold Lake Air Weapons Range, the creation of Jasper and Wood Buffalo National Parks. These are all outstanding issues that the Manitoba Métis Federation case says you can bring against the Crown. But like I said, the Crown refused. The Crown refused because they said Métis problems are the province's problems, and that is what the Daniels case is about. The original Constitution, the Constitution 1867, divides heads of power, they call it, responsibilities between the provinces and the federal government. And one of the responsibilities that is given to the federal government is Indians and lands reserved for the Indians. So Canada's position was, we're responsible for Indians, as we define it in the Indian Act. Métis aren't Indians, we're not responsible for you. But obviously, the meanings of words change over time, and when the Supreme Court was asked the question, they decided that Métis, for the purposes of federal responsibility, are in fact Indians within the meaning of the Constitution Act. Just like Inuit are Indians within the meaning of the Constitution Act. This doesn't mean that you're a status Indian. It doesn't mean that you're a treaty Indian. It means that Métis are a federal responsibility. This is how the court put it. Non-status Indians and Métis are Indians under Section 9124, and it is the federal government to whom they can turn. But, importantly, the Supreme Court tripled down on its statement that there is a context-specific duty to negotiate when Aboriginal rights are engaged. The three hurdles had fallen. It was clear Métis have Aboriginal rights. It was clear Métis can't advance their claims against the Crown, and it was clear that Métis are a federal responsibility. And after that happened, finally, after decades, Canada came to the table. And this was a process that began in 2016. It was called the Exploratory Discussions Process. It has had many stages. We'll walk through some of those stages, but it is what ultimately led to the signing of the self-government agreement in June. The first stage was, after some discussions in the fall of 2016, a memorandum of understanding was signed in January 2017. There was then a framework agreement that was signed. There was then the self-government agreement that was signed. And now there are some next steps to fulfill before Métis self-government in Alberta is enshrined in legislation. The first step was the Memorandum of Understanding. The explicit purpose of the Memorandum of Understanding was to negotiate a framework agreement. And the framework agreement was negotiated, that took about 6 months. The framework agreement had three purposes, has three purposes. It continues to exist. First is to give expression to the inherent right of the Métis Nation within Alberta to self-government and self-determination. Second is determining, recognizing, and ensuring respect for Section 35 rights of the Métis Nation within Alberta. And third is exploring with a view to settling the outstanding claims of the Métis Nation within Alberta. So the three purposes of the framework agreement mirror the three hurdles: the need to recognize rights, the need to recognize self-government, and the need to settle claims. The framework agreement also set out a number of sub-issues about which smaller agreements could be reached to address kind of outstanding aggravants. And we have been, over the years, almost 2 years since the framework agreement has been signed, working through this list and trying to solve these problems. So the first and most important was an agreement on self-government. I'm going to get back to that because it really is the topic of this afternoon's discussion. But there were also issues around consultation, around outstanding claims, national parks, housing, labor, and defense. We haven't solved all of these, but we have made tremendous progress. So in July 2018, just over a year ago, a consultation agreement was signed with Canada Canada acknowledged that it has an obligation to consult Métis in the province of Alberta, and importantly, it acknowledged that the way it would consult with Métis is the way that you decided to organize yourselves around the regional consultation protocols. So there was a tremendous recognition of your capacity to self-organize your self-government. An arrangement was reached with Parks Canada to acknowledge your Indigenous roots in the territory by allowing all MNA card holders to get into every national park and national historic site in the province for free just on presenting their cards. An agreement was reached with Canada Mortgage Housing to solve a long-standing irritant around the funding of replacement reserves for housing. But the big step, the big victory came this June, where we finally signed the Métis Government Recognition and Self-Government Agreement. What does this agreement do? Why is it such a big deal? For as long as I've worked for the MNA, and in fact, for as long as I have found written records in which the MNA is describing its goals and purposes, you have been trying to get out of the Societies Act and to develop your own constitution. You have been trying to no longer be a nonprofit corporation and to be recognized as a government in your own right. And what this agreement does is it establishes the pathway by which you can do that. It is your way out of the Societies Act. It is the platform by which your constitution will be recognized. How does it do it? It does it really by doing two things: by providing upfront recognition and by establishing a process. The process is incredibly important. First Nations have, since the 1970s, had a process that they could pursue to get out of the Indian Act and into self-government. That has been started with the comprehensive claims process, which morphed into what's called the inherent rights policy, or the self-government policy. It has its problems too. I'm not here to defend it, but at least it was available to First Nations. Nothing like that was ever available to the Métis. And so the progress that you made was entirely dependent on the political winds. If there was a sympathetic politician who felt that Métis might vote for him, you could make some progress towards self-government, but it would disappear as soon as you got out of office. What the agreement does is it ossifies the process. It creates a concrete process that is binding in law, that governments can't take away from you, so the path is yours to pursue. And that path is based on upfront recognition. The agreement says explicitly that upon signing of the agreement, Canada recognizes that the MNA is mandated to represent the Métis Nation within Alberta, that the Métis Nation within Alberta has an inherent right to self-government over its internal governance that is protected by sections 25 and 35 of the Constitution Act, and that the MNA has been mandated by the Métis Nation within Alberta to implement its inherent right to self-government that is protected by sections 25 and 35 of the Constitution Act. It says you have the right to self-government, and it says that this body, the Métis Nation of Alberta, is the vehicle by which you will get to self-government. Oops. And it does it in a way that doesn't undermine the strongly held belief, the truth, that your right to self-government doesn't come from Canada. It comes from you. It is inherent in you as an Indigenous people, as an Indigenous nation. We very much wanted to make this explicit in the agreement. Canada thinks that the reason that you need to negotiate with them for self-government is because they have all the government. They might give you a little bit of government for yourself, but they have all the government and they are the source of the power to govern. We know this not to be true. We have agreed to disagree on it, but it is clear that the MNA maintains its position that it is already a Métis government that is mandated by the Métis Nation within Alberta based on the inherent right of self-government, and that nothing in the agreement will be interpreted or used to undermine that position. So what is the process? How do you get there? There are several steps to the process. I'm going to walk through them. The most important, as I said, will be the development of a constitution, and that is going to get its own presentation. But from Canada's point of view, they have work to do too. They have agreed to adopt federal legislation that will implement these agreements. And it's going to be umbrella legislation. You signed Métis Government Recognition and Self-Government Agreement, but so did the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, so did the Métis Nation of Ontario. And they are on the same path. As they successfully complete the path, you will all rely on the same federal legislation to be recognized as governments. So what is the path? There are several steps. Once you complete all of these steps, and you don't need to do it in order, then Canada will recognize in legislation that the MNA is a government, and you'll get out of the Societies Act. The steps include adopting a constitution in a province-wide referendum, confirming the self-government agreement in that same referendum, negotiating an intergovernmental relations agreement with the federal government, negotiating a fiscal financing agreement with the federal government, establishing a transition plan, which is going to be the way that you transform from a nonprofit corporation into a government, and then finally, creating all of the government laws that you will need to rely on once you are a government. It's good to be a government, but you need to govern, and you need to do that the moment you become a government. So those laws need to be developed ahead of time. And once all that happens, Canada will issue an order in council. That order in council will move you under the umbrella of the Métis Government Recognition Law. The first and most important step is the development of the Constitution. I say that without hesitation. It is going to be the framework for your new government. It is a huge task, it is an inspiring task, and it is one that now as a nation, you need to stand up and realize. I'm going to move on because I have another presentation where I'm going to go through this in detail. The other steps, though, I will say I'm not worried about. They're going to be hard. You've done hard work before. We can negotiate the agreements we need to with Canada. But what you've never done before is pass the Constitution. And that really is the inspiring challenge that is going to occupy the MNA for the next couple of years. That Constitution, as I said, will have to be adopted in a province-wide referendum. That actually is not so much a requirement of Canada as it is a requirement you have imposed upon yourself. Because the MNA has always been a democratic institution. Métis governance has always been fundamentally democratic. And the idea that a constitution would take effect and displace this organization that has been here for 90 years without having a popular mandate simply won't float. So there needs to be a province-wide referendum. The Constitution will establish the process by which you will make laws, and the Métis Government Recognition and Self-Government Agreement immediately recognizes your jurisdiction to make laws in a few key areas. Those areas that you absolutely have to have legislation in place for in order to operate as a government. That is the identification of your own citizens, who is a member of your nation, how you select your leaders, leadership selection, how you operate internally. That will give you the basic edifice of government. Once you have that, we can negotiate further jurisdiction with Canada. Around these three core issues, what's essential to understand is that the self-government agreement says the laws that you make will have paramountcy over the laws of Canada. That is, they'll trump Canada's laws. If Canada makes a law about who is in the Métis Nation and you make a law about who is in the Métis Nation, your law takes precedence. I think that is absolutely worth cheering. Think of how far we've come. We've come from A time when Canada refused responsibility even to impose a colonial legislation on you like the Indian Act, and now they're saying that even if they tried, your law would take precedence. It's a tremendous reversal of roles for Canada. The other thing that we have said in the agreement is that although the agreement is limited to recognizing for now jurisdiction over these 3 small areas, that doesn't mean that you have given up your position that your jurisdiction actually comes from your inherent right and that you can exercise it as an inherent right. Canada might not recognize it for now, but you are in no way prohibited from governing beyond the 4 corners of the agreement, and we'll fight it out later. And there are already good examples of that. Harvesting is a great example of that. In what area could the Métis Nation government in Alberta have more jurisdiction than in the area of the exercise of Aboriginal rights by your own citizens? And with the work that we've done with the province, with the recognition of your harvesting rights, the MNA is now in a position to adopt its own policies about how you accept people into the community for the purpose of exercising those rights. We're already at a place where you can stand on your own 2 feet based on your inherent right and attempt to govern beyond the 4 corners of the agreement. And we can, of course, negotiate more jurisdiction with Canada that Canada will recognize. And there's an annex in the agreement with a long list of topics about which further negotiations can take place. And they range from culture and language all the way to land management, to child welfare, to education. There's a long list of priority areas that can become the subject of self-government once the government is established. You'll also need an intergovernmental relations agreement. One thing about the self-government agreement is that we were very afraid that Canada would change its mind and stop negotiating, and we wanted absolutely to have it done before this next election. I don't think that an Andrew Scheer would be nearly as willing to negotiate self-government as the Trudeau government was, and so there are a number of details that are left out, in particular about the administration of laws. Who will enforce these laws? And so those are things that will be negotiated in an intergovernmental relations agreement. Fiscal financing, you need to pay for it. There needs to be a basis by which you pay for it, and we will negotiate a transfer payment like a relationship between the federal government and the Métis government to make sure that you have the resources that you need. And finally, a transition plan. Right now, as I have said, the Métis Nation government or the Métis Nation of Alberta is a nonprofit society, but it's actually many nonprofit societies. All of the affiliates are incorporated separately, the regions are incorporated separately, the locals are incorporated separately. There are complicated legal ways in which all of these institutions depend on one another. But it is like a spider's web, and eventually that needs to be transitioned so that it can be recognized as one united government, and that is what the transition plan will do. And now's the time for the hard work. Now that we have the agreement, we just need to get it done. Should we do questions about the agreement now, if you have any, before we jump into the Constitution? Does that make sense?
Good evening. I have a question about your Métis Nation Constitution. On your introduction, I haven't heard or noticed where you're including the Métis settlement members who are Métis Nation members in the Constitution. And I think it's vitally important to include the Métis people from the settlements in your constitution, there should be a clause in there where you're including the Métis settlement members. Any reason why we're not included? Is there something holding you back from including the Métis Nation settlement members and who are also Métis Nation members?
Thank you for the comment. That is an excellent point. Nothing is meant to exclude the Métis settlements. I'll get into more detail about the Constitution itself. The one thing the agreement says is that when you define who the members of the nation are, the citizens of the nation, people will have to voluntarily register. You voluntarily register to become a citizen of the nation. Nothing says that a member of the settlement is prohibited from registering. If settlement members want to be citizens of the government of the Métis Nation within Alberta, they can be, absolutely.
Yeah, good point. Very good point, because we all know, I'm from a settlement myself. I'm from Kikino Métis settlement. I'm a Region 1 member. I'm a third-generation Métis Nation member of Alberta, and I'm a third-generation Métis settlement member. We all know in the Métis settlements in Alberta that they had a clause in the legislation which included treaty members, treaty status members as a part of Métis Nation. We all know the problem is you can't hold a dual citizenship in Alberta, in Canada. Call yourself a Métis and yet identify yourself as a status or treaty Indian. And that's happening in our settlements. It's a big problem in the Métis settlements of Alberta. We went to the Métis Nation of Alberta. Madam Patra is here as a witness to what I'm saying, where we said you got to develop a citizenship, not a membership, because membership, you could be a member of a golf club. Anybody could include themselves as a member under the old membership. You have to develop a new citizenship which would solely say or identify yourself as a Métis. And MNA did that. The Métis settlements are starting to come on board with that, and that's a problem where that's what divides our nations, our settlements and the MNA, is because the MNA has this criteria saying you have to be third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation Métis in the province of Alberta, and nobody likes it because they don't identify with that, because they're sneaking in saying they're Métis, but they're holding a status card. It's a dual citizenship shit, and we don't want that. If we're going to identify ourselves as a unique nation and identify ourselves as a Métis Nation, we have to be strict. And that's what the Métis Nation of Alberta is doing. They started to phase into that, saying we're strictly Métis. You can't be status, treaty, and call yourself a Métis. And that's what the people, they're having a problem with under the old school, where you could shake hands and say, I'm Métis. Yeah, accept this guy as a Métis because he's my brother. It don't work that way anymore. In order for us to say we're unique and identify ourselves as a unique nation, we have to come up with this criteria where citizenship has to be strictly Métis.
That's
Under the Constitution, if we're going to develop a Constitution, we have to do it right. We have to work as a nation, strictly within a nation, meaning if we're going to say we're Métis and develop this Constitution, how can we do it if so many people carry a treaty card and a status card and saying they're Métis underneath this Métis Nation? Let's do this right. We're going to develop this constitution and say to Canada, we're a nation. We have to be unique. We have to identify as a unique nation. We don't go stepping on First Nations saying we want to vote in your elections, we want to participate in your elections and funding and everything. We're not like that. Us, as a nation, Métis people, we have our own way. We stand in the best position in Canada, you guys, by identifying ourselves as a nation. And we're going to do this with the Constitution. Let's do it right. Let's say we're Métis and strictly Métis. We don't want to carry these people that are holding status cards or treaty cards in our nation like they did before. I respect Jim Sinclair, who was a great leader, passed on. I respect him because he fought for Métis rights, but he carried a status card. Our leaders never had to carry Stan Daniels didn't carry a status card. He didn't identify himself as a treaty or a status. What's happening across our nation with all these locals, all these people that are sitting there flying the Métis flag, our status. They're not clean who they are. They're not trying to say, yeah, we're Métis. They're arguing saying we can be Indigenous and carry a status card and claim we're Métis at the same time. There's no such thing. In Canada, there's no such thing as a dual citizenship. And that's what's haunting our nation right now. Is these people
that's an
well, I'm
excellent
just
point.
telling you, like, if we're going to develop a constitution, do it right.
It's an excellent point.
Let's do it as a nation, Métis Nation. That's who we are.
It's a fantastic point. It's an excellent point. What the Constitution will do, what the agreement does, is empowers you to determine the criteria for citizenship. I actually think that there's very little debate about this in the Métis Nation. I think the overwhelming majority of people would agree with you. You have a definition that works, the national definition of Métis, and you cannot be a status Indian and qualify under that definition. All right, you have a definition that works, the national definition, and you cannot qualify as Métis under that definition and carry a status card.
Go to the mic over here, please introduce yourself. We get the mics turned on over there, please.
Test. Good afternoon. Karen Collins, Region 2. Real easy question, Zach. Is it possible to get a copy of your presentation?
I'm sure it is. I imagine we can put it up on the website.
Besides the website, I know there's a lot of people here that may not be able to access a website or anything. Is it possible to get a hard copy, some hard copies available, or email to some folks? Because
Yeah.
it's really good, because some of the slides we couldn't see because of the lighting and stuff.
Okay.
So I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll get some copies made. We'll send somebody to a copy store or something. Thanks, Karen. Microphone.
I thank the Father for allowing me to be here in front of you wonderful people. My name is Zane Collins. I am from the Elizabeth Métis settlement. You can find me in Zone 2, Region 2. When we talk about Constitution, we talk about consultation, talk about reconciliation. We have all these wonderful words. And you talked about the importance. We'll take it right to the consultation with the importance of people like my friend here speaking on behalf of settlement people, colony, we're from the colony. Our rights. Sitting across from an organization, we overly use the word recognize. You can't recognize settlements, you won't even acknowledge them. We have two leaderships from two organizations who won't even acknowledge one another. And we talk about a constitution. When we have consultation, I've had no consultation with any of my leaders. I've called my leaders. I've stopped them on the street. I've spoke to them, and I've told them the importance of listening to people like us, me, who I've walked on the street. I've fought those battles. And I've watched these leaderships profess to represent me. And I've come there and I've walked and I've hitchhiked to the office to get assistance from this leadership who now want to develop a constitution to represent me on a settlement. I am very, very agitated. You can tell. And you can all feel it at one point in time. My heart's boiling. Listening to people like you, your grandeur. Oh, we can do this, we can do this. But in reality, my friend, where's the acknowledgement going to come from? From you, with your grandeur words? From our leadership, who cannot consult or acknowledge their people when they request help? No, when we come to the table and we talk like this, and we look at one another, what are we talking about? From a definition? From you, a lawyer? Or the Supreme Court who said this? And to make another point, it wasn't Pauli, it was Harry the Dog Daniels who ensured that we're here today. And I'll stand up to anybody in this entire nation, leadership or not, lawyers, consults. Bring it. That's where I'm at. I don't know about the rest of this nation, but I'm tired of the lunacy. Believing that change is going to come by listening to you people, electing you people, and you nowhere to be found when I need you. Look under the definition of lunacy, Mr. Lawyer. We're doing the same thing without change, and we're expecting it. I thank you for listening. There's no room for apologies anymore. There's no room for diplomacy. We battle with the symptoms. You put up the symptoms for us to read, and you smile and say wonderful things. Yet the ones on the streets like myself who are fighting, who can find nothing, look for us, because we're coming. Thank you.
Ben House from Region 1. I forgot to introduce myself earlier, and I begged AGM for forgiveness. I didn't introduce myself properly. The point I want to make, we talked about the Métis settlements and the MNA, and just to add to some clarity, I'm going to ask Madam Patra, who sits here, and I've done it before, and I'll do it again. I want to ask and beg your, whatever it takes to bring inclusiveness to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta in your constitution. I think is vitally important. In order for us to be a united nation, you need to include the Métis settlements in your constitution, or there always be a division. I think in the grand scheme of things, late Stan Daniels' biggest mistake, he'd probably admit today if he was alive, was not including the settlements with the Métis Nation of Alberta. I urge Madam Patra, there she goes, she's going to get up to the mic and talk about it, because I've vehemently, over and over again, tried to get her to include the Métis settlements in this constitution because of unity. We're divided right now. Our nations are divided. Madam Patra knows this. And the reason why we recognize Madam Patra as our leader in the Métis Nation is because we vote for her. We don't vote for the Métis Settlement General Council president. They don't include us. It's like a tyranny over there. So to us, the leader in Alberta for the Métis Nation is Audrey Patra. The lady we vote for, Daniel Cardinal, Vice President, we vote for him. These are the people we put in charge to lead our nation. We don't vote for whoever's leading the Métis Settlement General Council. And in order for us to grow and be recognized by federal government, we have to do it democratically. Everybody knows it's a democracy in Canada, and we vote for Audrey Patra and these people to lead us. So please take a real strong, good look at the settlements and include us. We're Métis members. I'm a third generation Métis member. We need this inclusion to form this constitution to do it right. So whether you put a little clause in there that says, yes, we recognize the Métis settlements members, MNA members, or also Métis settlement members in your constitution, would be, I think, a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I do want to respond to the last two gentlemen about settlement members. So, certainly in the past, and as we go forward, negotiating the Constitution for the Métis Nation within Alberta, as long as I have anything to do about it, we will never leave any citizen out. And I will honestly say to you, people have a right to choose where they want to live. And for anybody who doesn't know the history of the Métis Nation within Alberta, it was people that lived off those lands and on those lands that fought very hard to save those lands way back then. And I constantly give credit to all those past leaders, whether it was to help save those lands or whether it was to go further forward, like I heard from Zane Collins, Harry Daniels, any of those people who stood up and worked day after day after day to have recognition for who we were as Métis people in this province and in this country. I constantly give them credit, because just because we as the Provincial Council happen to be here today and being able to have the opportunity to move forward and have a constitution that is recognized by the governments in this country, we didn't do it. We didn't do it alone. All those people, including all of you people, all had something to do with it. Because when we talk about no consultation, I could spend a half a day telling you in the last 23 years how many consultation meetings we had across this province. Whether that was for harvesting, whether that was at different times for constitutions, whether that was to change our bylaws, whether that was for any of those things, we never did it without going and consulting with people. That's one thing we always did. And we'll continue doing it today and tomorrow and as long as it takes. And I hope it doesn't take us a long time, because we've been at it for a long time. But I want to say to the settlement members that are here, we're talking about citizens of the Métis Nation who live on those lands. And if there's more citizens that live on those lands that haven't registered with us, I'd like to suggest you come out and register as well, so we all go forward as strong as we possibly can, because that's what a nation is all about. So I'll guarantee you, as we start talking about Constitution, you have your part to do too. I'm not going to come to every home and deliver a notice to come to a meeting, but we will post them like we always have. And we welcome all of you. Come out and be part of it. We need our elders, we need our veterans, we need our seniors, we need our young people. We need all of us to make it the very best we can, because it's what we will live by for the next while. And I'm really, really excited about moving forward in this next step, because, and I want to just say very, very clearly to Zane, no one, or certainly me, ever forgets Harry Daniels and what he did. Or the Powley case, what Mr. Powley did. Or the Manitoba Métis Federation cases. All of those pieces helped us get us to where we are today. So I am very, very thankful for those previous leaders who did all the work. And I want to say, please, come and help us make that Constitution that doesn't leave anyone out. Thank you.
All right, we have a couple more people at the mics. We're going to take those two questions, then we're going to move into the second part of the presentation, which is specifically on a constitution for the Métis Nation of Alberta and the road ahead.
Thank you, Madam Potras. We love that. We love it. But anyways, when it comes to the Constitution in regards to the Kikino settlement, well, I come from there. My cookum, 3 generations. My cookum sat in the pita pan, sit-in. She did the lockdown at Portage College. She arranged and went to Ottawa and brought provincial funding home for all Indigenous people to be educated in my community. That's the cloth that I come from. But the thing that I have an issue with the settlements is the fact that they utilize the Indian Act inside their Métis Settlement Act. And we, Métis, we all know our identity is not based on the Indian Act. And in their sections of the Métis Settlement Act, sections 75 and 90, there's a contradiction and it's unconstitutional. So if we're going to define Métis, there should not be no Indian Act to define who we are. Thank you.
Great. Zane, nothing? Okay. All right, we're going to move into the second part of our presentation on the Constitution. So Zach's going to come up and finish with that part. And James Henry, he just went to go make some photocopies. I told him make 20 copies of the presentation. So if you want one when you come back, just let me know.
So now, the time has come to talk about the Constitution. And it is essential that we go into this, that you go into this with the right frame of mind. Why do you want a Constitution? You don't want a Constitution because the agreement says that that's the next step. You don't want a Constitution just because the lawyer has come to tell you you need a Constitution. You want a constitution because it is an essential element of self-government. And self-government is a right that you have, that you hold as inherent to you as an Indigenous people. That's why you want a constitution. You want it as an expression of your inherent Indigenous right to self-determination and to self-government. A right that is acknowledged in other documents, acknowledged in documents like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but more importantly, acknowledged by you, acknowledged by your present and historic leaders. This is a paragraph written by Louis Riel, who we all know for being extremely eloquent in the way that he talked about the Métis Nation and Métis governance. And I think it's worth reading because it really, to me at least, grounds this project. When the Government of Canada presented itself at our doors, it found us at peace. It found that the Métis people of the Northwest could not only live well without it, but that it had a government of its own, free, peaceful, well-functioning, contributing to the work of civilization in a way that the company from England could never have done without thousands of soldiers. It was a government with an organized constitution whose jurisdiction was more legitimate and worthy of respect because it exercised over a country that belonged to it. It was a government and a constitution born of the land that was Aboriginal, that was autochthonous of the land. And that is what this project is about. It's about getting back to that. So I think you need to look for inspiration in how you have always done things. You need to look for inspiration in history and also in what works contemporaneously. And you can, when you do that, see, you have a long tradition of self-government. A tradition that at different points in time has been articulated eloquently to fit the imperatives of the time. And there are examples of that from across the homeland. One example are the laws of the buffalo hunt. Other examples are in settlements in the mid-19th century, Métis councils got together and codified laws of the prairie. They did this across the homeland, in Red River, in St. Albert, in Qu'Appelle, in St. Laurent. And at times in history, you know, there were particularly strong examples of Métis self-government in action. In 1869, in 1885. And when those governments were organized, they were organized around principles that were uniquely Métis. Riel would talk about the provisional government in Red River in 1869 in terms of a Red River cart, with the councillors elected from the English parishes and the councillors elected from the French parishes being like spokes on the wheel of the cart, held together by a hub. That hub is the executive among them that was elected. And those hubs working in unison under the leadership of a single president who played the role of the axle, making sure that the machinery of government would turn and be synchronized. And then on the outer rim of the Red River cart wheels, where the rubber of government hits the road, services could be delivered, laws could be enforced, a government could serve its people. So why a constitution? You need a constitution to establish that machinery. You need a constitution to be that frame, to be the axle, to be the hub, to be the spokes, so that your government can drive forward. Remember the first presentation, and we talked about negotiations, and what's the purpose of negotiations? Well, one of the purposes of negotiations is to give expression to the inherent right of Métis Nation within Alberta to self-government and self-determination. And now, your self-government agreement says that Canada will recognize that expression once you have done a certain number of things, once you've completed a certain number of tasks, and the most important one, the first one on the list, is a constitution has been ratified. So what does the Constitution have to do? Fundamentally, at its most basic level, what needs to be in it? What questions does it have to answer? If I boil it down, I can think of 4 fundamental questions that the Constitution needs to answer. What are the Métis Nation's values? who makes the Métis Nation's laws, who implements those laws, and who resolves disputes about those laws. And we can think about this using the same metaphor that Riel used, the metaphor of the Red River cartwheel. The values are going to be right at the center. The values are going to hold it all together. They will be the hub. The branches of government, the three branches of government, will be the spokes. The making of laws, the resolving of disputes, and the implementing of laws. So what is at the center? What are the values? I don't think it's going to be an esoteric exercise to try to, get to the heart of Métis Nation values. If they are important enough to the nation to be expressed in the Constitution, then you already know what they are. And I don't think there's any controversy in saying that things like democracy, independence, unity of the nation, your distinct character as Métis, your distinct identity, that came across clearly already this afternoon as a key Métis value. Self-reliance and respect between you. Where the work needs to be done, the hard part, the creative part, is giving expression to those values in the Constitution itself. We can list them, but how do we live them? That's the hard part. And so those values will find expression in things like the rights and responsibilities that are given to citizens, the rights and responsibilities that are given to leaders, the process by which you select your leaders, and the process by which you hold your leaders accountable. Once we know what the values are, we start to articulate them through the body of the Constitution. The next really fundamental question is who does what? Who's going to do what in this new government? Who's going to make the laws? Who's going to implement the laws? Who's going to resolve disputes? In lawyer language, we call this who is the legislator, who is the executive, and who's the judiciary. Making of the laws. So there's a number of questions that need to be answered around the making of the laws. It's not just who is important, what is the body responsible, but it's also what is the process that they use to make laws? How do they do it? What are the subject matters about which they can make laws? Some of that is already answered. Citizenship, leadership selection, internal organization. Some of it, there's room for expansion. Child welfare, education, training. Where will the laws apply? What territory? And to whom will they apply? To the citizens of the Métis Nation. Then who implements the laws? What is your executive? Who's the actual day-to-day government that's doing the work? Currently, you have divided your executive, your implementers, into three branches, or three levels: the provincial council, the regional councils, and the local councils. Is that a structure you want to keep? If it is a structure you want to keep, how do you divide responsibilities among those levels? What is the provincial council's job? What are the regional council's job? What about the locals? And who resolves disputes? When there is a dispute between a regional council and a local council, when there is a dispute about whether a person should be granted citizenship, when there is a dispute about how a leader fulfilled or failed to fulfill their responsibilities, what is the body responsible for resolving that? And what kinds of disputes can they address? What's the process by which they do it? And how do they enforce their decisions? What teeth do they have? Once that's in place, then, as I said, the rubber of government can hit the road. Once you can make a law, implement a law, and resolve a dispute about a law, then you have the structure, you have the architecture on which you can really deliver the services that your citizens need. You can get out there and assess their needs, and you can answer their needs with tailored services that reflect the unique needs, the unique ambitions of Métis citizens in the province, whether about culture or education or harvesting or economic development or housing. And so I like to think of the Constitution, I like to think of the job that you have around the metaphor of the cartwheel. There may be other metaphors. There are certainly other ways to think about it. But part of the work that you all need to start doing now is the imagining. There is no doubt in my mind that we are on the right path, that you are on the right path. I have heard almost from every citizen of the Métis Nation in Alberta that I have spoken to that you want to get out of the Societies Act and you want a constitution. There are some elements of that constitution, like who your citizens are, that you have very clear answers about. You have a very clear vision of. And then there are other elements, like who is going to make the laws, where there are more open questions. And so the work now of imagining, of getting a vision to be expressed through the document is crucial. And it's incredibly exciting, and I invite you all to start doing it over the weekend. So there are some parameters that are set out for what needs to be in the Constitution that are in the self-government agreement. It's a long and technical list. It includes things like definitions of citizenship, conflict of interest rules, rules around voting and referendum, criteria for delegating authority. But what this long list achieves, once a constitution is drafted that meets all these criteria, I think can be boiled down in the 4 basic questions that I set out in the presentation. What are your values? Who makes your laws? How do they do it? Who implements your laws? How do they do it? Who resolves disputes? How do they do it? And the other parameter around the Constitution that is set out in the agreement is some guidelines as to how it will be adopted. And that is through a democratic process that reflects Métis customs, practices, and traditions. And what that process is has been committed to already by President Patra. It will be a province-wide referendum. And so ultimately, it's not that recognition will come from Canada. It's not that recognition will come from your lawyer in Toronto. Recognition will come from you. It will come from the citizens who vote in favor of and adopt and support the new Constitution. Start the work. Start the imagining. Have fun. Get it done.
All right, time for questions. Who's got questions? Somebody's moving to the back. Great. Are you able to go to a mic, or do you want us to bring you a microphone? Oh, okay. Go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Can everyone hear me? I might get kicked out of here because I want you to know that I'm a status Indian. I'm not Métis, I'm a status Indian, I'm not treaty. I was born in British Columbia. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and I'm married to a beautiful Métis lady, and I have Métis children, right? There's something I need to bring up, and I've been to these, you guys have seen me, I've been to these assemblies for dozens of years, and I just want to ask a question, and then you guys can kick me out if you feel like it. Here it is, you guys. I'm a status Indian, not treaty, and there's a big difference. I come from a reserve in British Columbia, and I have traditional and cultural rights across Canada. Nobody wearing a fancy uniform can stop me from hunting in British Columbia, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and I strongly suggest that when the Métis people get together and build this Constitution, that they fight for rights not just for the Métis Nation of Alberta. I'm not saying that despairingly, I'm not saying anything bad about it. I'm just saying that me, as an Indian guy, very proud to be Indian, I think that if I have the rights under the Constitution Act to hunt from coast to coast to coast, then you should build your constitution so that you also have those rights, not just in Alberta, but right across Canada. I know, okay, I hate the sound of my own voice, so I'm going to get out of here. But I also feel that from here on, when you start building this constitution, I've found this out because as you guys know, my brother is the chief of my own band, and I wouldn't say he's a moron, but he's my brother, and sometimes I vote for him because he's family. But please, when you decide who's going to start negotiating and building your constitution, please do not do like I do and vote for the guy or choose the guy because he's my brother, he's my best friend, he's my mom. Choose the people who can make the most difference for the Métis people entirely. Thank you.
Do I go ahead, Aaron?
Yeah, please.
Karen Collins, Region 2. I want to second his recommendations there. Very good ones. Thank you, Warren. My first question is in regards to the process that we're talking about. And I know we haven't come to a full conclusion on it, but I think it's something that it's certainly been on my mind for the last few years since we started discussing these things, and that's with respect to the referendum process. We know that that is a tool that many countries, other governments, nations use as a tool. A very good tool because it gives you the high percentage. But on the flip side, I want us to consider that when we talk about referendum and we attach percentage to it, that we be mindful of the high goal that we're trying to reach. Now, I'm saying that because I too would like to reach that high goal and say 85% of the 40,000 Métis in Alberta voted on it. That's a really awesome dream. And I'm going to say dream because when we look in this room, this is a very low end of participation from the number of citizens that are registered on our roll. And so I'm bringing it to the attention of us in the room, but certainly of the people that are going to come and consult with us in our communities. Because like we heard earlier, we're still going to have consultation process to come and chat with us, because I think we need to think hard about that referendum. If we use the process of referendum, then I think we need to think about the percentage. So I just wanted to raise that as a first red flag to me, because I really don't want to see us build up awesome constitution, put a high percentage at a referendum, and not get it. What will that look like? So that's my first point.
Thanks, Karen.
The second point I need to raise, and I'm hoping that I know that we chat about we need to have those mechanisms to come and talk in the communities, and I know. And I encourage that because we were trying to reach a lot of the young people that participate on the Facebook page and all those other social media pieces. Wonderful. But there's also people, and I want to include myself on that carry a lot of the history and have been coming to assemblies since I was 8 years old, coming to assemblies and watching and being part of our nation growing. There's other people probably in this room who don't know how to access Facebook. So we need to have that, because as fast as we want to run with social media, We need to be as slow as the people who actually brought us here. So in saying that, I just want to say that as we're developing our processes for consultation, how are we going to go and talk to our people in our communities, that you consider that we take that into consideration, because as we go forward and even at next assembly, it won't be a fun thing if we say, oh, we got a draft constitution, and then we have people that set up, well, I never got a chance to speak to it. I really don't want to see that happen, because again, it's that percentage part of the 40,000 Métis citizens that need to have their input so that they know what the heck they're going to be voting on a referendum. Thank you so much.
Those are both excellent points. On the percentage point, I would point out that it hasn't been decided yet what the threshold will be. There are two thresholds. There is a threshold around the number of people that need to vote, whether it's yes or no, and then there's a threshold around the number of people that need to vote yes. We're very mindful of the concerns that you've raised. They're incredibly important concerns, and I think they can be decided also in consultation with citizens. And on the second point, you're again absolutely right. The Métis Nation in Alberta is an extremely diverse nation, and I think that leadership is very mindful that it needs to be spoken to in a number of different ways. Yes, social media, community meetings, telephone surveys, and all of those ways of speaking will reach different ears.
Good afternoon. My name is Cecil Belrose from Zone 4, Edmonton. I want to thank you, Zach, for your presentation. It's been great. There's a lot of work I know, to go build a constitution, and we have to get started, but I just want to bring everybody's attention to the fact that we have a federal election coming up pretty quick. And if we don't elect Trudeau, we'll be going back to John A. Macdonald days. So that is my only point, to make sure you get everybody out to vote for Trudeau, regardless of what he says or does. He is the only hope we got. And if he doesn't get elected, all our hard work's going to be for nothing. Thank you very much.
Angie Creer, Grand Prairie, Region 6. Excuse me. Oh, my brothers and sisters of Métis Nation, I want to ask you a question. What did June 28, 2019 mean to you? For me, it was an end of an era and a new step, a new beginning for the Métis Nation. We've had our forefathers. I'm sure were jigging in heaven that day. I know my grandfather and my dad were. It's a day of celebration, an era that was given to us, passed on to us as a gift from our forefathers. And I know that Louis Riel up there, he was smiling because his vision for his people became reality that day. Now our work begins. We have to work together to make this work. We can't expect all our leaders to do all the work. You know what your needs are, your community, your family. Step up to the plate and be counted. You deserve the best that the Métis Nation can give. At the same time, I would like to thank our beloved president and her council for all the work in the past 23 years that led to that historic day of June 28th. Thank you.
So my name is Brian Fayant. I'm guessing you didn't say anything, so Mr. Chair, so I'm just going to assume this. From Fort Mac Region 1. First off, good work on getting the framework actualized, realized, and getting the resources to do this. So the business of this constitution and self-government is not new. I mean, we've argued this forever. I think Joe Blind was involved when it first began. Well, maybe it's not 91, okay. Maybe there was other people. Just saying, I've watched him argue and debate this long before we brought it to this table. This is not new, but it's the piece that you guys are introducing, the intelligence that you're putting to it is great. So and I was all ready to come and talk about submitting a framework, what I thought was a framework or a constitutional framework, but I'm thinking it's going to be a governing framework. So when you're going around asking people or inviting people to participate, I have some ideas, and this idea came from having worked with government, mental health, Alberta Social Services, Children's Services over the years, and how they formulate their framework. So I'll just give it to you really quick. It's politics, policy, program development, and program delivery. That's the framework. All of the pieces that you described today, I was trying to figure, does this fit into that framework? And it does. So all the pieces in between if you have a framework, allows us to then build our nation, build our constitution, build our governance process. So anyway, just wanted to say that, and we look forward to hearing whoever you hire. I think you need to hire some good people. I recall being involved in some discussions when we tried to get a constituency-based process in place, and that fell on its face. So we need to really be aware as to who we hire, how we hire, and those people have a grasp on the facilitating process, if you will. So that, I guess, will be useful when you go to consultations. Thank you very much.
Excellent points. Really, really glad to see how much thought you've put into this already. That is going to be very useful moving forward. I should just say that tomorrow a regular resolution will be put to the floor, doubling down on a commitment that Provincial Council has already made to establish a commission to put in that kind of deep thinking into the constitution development that you're talking about. So, to get this process moving, supporting that resolution tomorrow is the first step.
Hello again. Thank you very much for where we are. And I do want to make a point, Brian. It is new, because the past was talk. We're at a point where it has to start. So it is new, Brian. When we talk about you heard about the referendum, and you've heard me talk a little bit about the consultation. I'll take it for granted there will be a schedule, because when it did begin last year and the discussion started, I recall requesting a schedule and going to the office. It's nice to know there is going to be a schedule. And when we talk about Constitution, we talk about our past, and I welcome that status Indian, because when we talk about consultation and reconciliation, those are the people we have to reconcile with. This is their land. It always has been, always will be, and we're here to share it with them. It's native land. Listen to our national anthem. Because along with that, in the beginning, with our fair Métis Nation, it was a native, an Indian, who denounced his rights to establish the Métis Nation of Alberta. It was an Indian who started it. So why we have anything against our brothers, I don't understand. And you talked about 4 points. For myself, I have a really hard time with the mention. All I heard was laws, 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 laws. I didn't hear anything about our rights, about our freedoms, about what we enjoy as our traditions, as our customs. Who's going to make the laws? Who's going to enforce them? Who's going to make sure that they're done? That hurts my heart, people. And if I'm the only one, well, you're going to hear about it. I'm not against our Métis Nation, what we've done. I'm hurting. I'm speaking on my own behalf. I'm not speaking for anybody else here. I'm speaking for my grandchildren. I've been taught by my parents that I have to ensure that several generations after me are taken care of. Now I'm fighting with my grandchildren. And this is what it's all about, people. It's not about us. We're doing the fighting. We're talking about professing to be leaders and what we have to do and we have to get together. Well, there's some of us out there with grandchildren who are really hurting. And we're doing it for them. Let's not forget that. Because if I'm just up here wanting to hear myself, to convince myself that something's going to happen for me and what I believe in, then that's what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think those were all excellent points. To the point of the presentation being heavy on laws, I am a lawyer, but you are absolutely correct that the Constitution needs to incorporate also rights, also responsibilities, also values to make sure that the laws, which ultimately the Constitution will enable, expresses those and gives them life for generations to come. You're absolutely right. And I think your very first point is also very good, that it is different now. Yes, you have been talking about a constitution for a very long time, but in the absence of some kind of outside recognition, adopting a constitution would have created a crisis where you had different structures of legitimacy for the government. Now, if you adopt a constitution, it becomes a rebirth of your organization. It really is an opportunity as opposed to a crisis. And it's an old story, but it's a new telling, and I think you should all be very excited for it.
Thank you very much for those that provided comments, asked questions. That was awesome. We're pretty much done our agenda for today. We can continue the discussion if people like. We can adjourn. But actually, I have a bit of an idea. We have Zach here. He's got a lot of knowledge. Some of you may have noticed that St. Paul's having this celebration right now. I think it's how many years? What are they celebrating? 110 years or something they're celebrating? A lot of you may or may not know this community used to be called St. Paul de Métis. And obviously it was a Métis community. And over time, the Métis, we were forced out of our community here. And it's actually on our big laundry list of claims against the Crown that need to be settled. So because we have extra time and because we're in St. Paul and because they're celebrating their town, which is great, I think I'm going to ask Zach to provide, just off the top of his head, this wasn't planned, talk a little bit about what happened in St. Paul de Métis, back 110 years ago. And then we'll adjourn after that unless people want to continue the dialogue. I mean, we got microphones and we got space, and I'm sure people got lots to say too. So, all right, we're going to ask Zach to do that next.
So please don't take any notes on this portion of the presentation. Since I had not prepared to talk about it, I might get some dates and names wrong. But the story of Saint Paul de Métis is fascinating, and it is extremely unique. In the late 19th century, already as a result of scrip, Métis were being dispossessed of their land. And maybe I can start this story by talking a little bit about scrip. You know the story of scrip. When, in this part of the world, when treaty commissions came through, they counted the native people in the areas and they divided them into First Nations people and Métis people. First Nations people were offered treaties established reserves, treaties established annual payments, treaties protected some harvesting rights. Métis people were offered scrip, and scrip was essentially a coupon that was in theory redeemable for a certain amount of land, or that had a dollar value that could be used only to purchase land. But it was prohibitively difficult to cash the scrip in. And the best the best accountings are that maybe only 2% of Métis people that actually got scrip got land. So 98% of the Métis population in the prairies is dispossessed. It's a land fraud that covered about 5 million acres across the prairie provinces. And this creates a social crisis. You can't dispossess a people of their land and their way of life and deny their rights without then creating a social crisis. And at the end of the 19th century, this social crisis was apparent to anyone that cared to look. The social institution that really dealt with charity in this part of the world at that time in history was the church. And the church also had a vested interest in the Métis population, because the Métis population was Catholic, the church was Catholic, but they could see the writing on the wall, and they were just as afraid of white Protestant Anglophones coming in from Ontario and usurping their foothold here. So, in the 1890s, Oblate missionaries proposed the idea of creating a Métis reserve. And they do establish a Métis reserve with a land grant and financing from the federal government in Saint-Paul-des-Métis. And those are the origins of St. Paul. It was a two-tiered project. It was meant to be a reserve, so to protect Métis land, but also to teach Métis people how to live in a modern world, how to take up agriculture, how to take on vocational jobs. So they created a residential school, a vocational school in Saint-Paul-des-Métis as well. So it's a reserve, it's a residential school, and it's actually the only Métis reserve that was ever established by the federal government, and as far as I know, it was the only Métis-specific residential school that was ever established by the federal government. Métis people, as you know, are and have always been fiercely independent, Otsipamisewak. And they didn't take very kindly or naturally to being stuck on a reserve and told to farm the way that the Oblate missionaries told them to farm. And, didn't take up a sedentary lifestyle readily. They also didn't like being cooped up in the school. So they're coming and going, they're hunting, they're coming back, they're doing some agriculture. The agriculture meets mixed success. The Métis children, to their enormous credit, burnt down the school. So the school ends up a failure. And at this point in at this point in time, the province has been created. It's 1905, 1908, and the church starts to see the writing on the wall that the immigrants that are coming in are Protestant. And so what they do is they reach out to settlers in Quebec. They reach out to settlers in French Canada who are staunch Catholics, and they invite them to come to Saint-Paul-des-Métis, and they start encouraging French-Canadian settlers to squat on the Métis lands. And they do squat on the Métis lands, and they are much better farmers than the Métis, probably because they care, not because Métis can't farm, but because they're used to the way of life. And eventually, they use the
Aaron, can you call some quiet here? I mean, if people want to talk, then go outside. We're trying to hear this presentation.
If you didn't hear Brian, it's probably because you were talking at your table, but what he said was stop talking so people can hear the presentation. So please do that. Thanks.
So now we have a Saint-Paul-des-Métis, which is a reserve set aside for Métis, but that is really kind of overwhelmingly populated by French-Canadian squatters, which were encouraged by the church, and no one has tried to remove them. And so the church turns to the federal government and says, look, it didn't work, but it's a French community, why don't we turn it into a town? And they end the reserve project, and that's the birth of St. Paul. So 110 years ago, Métis land was stolen by French-Canadian squatters. And it's worth celebrating. It's the birth of the town of St. Paul and a strong Franco-Albertan community. And I have nothing against the Franco-Albertans. My grandfather was Franco-Albertan. They're good people, but it's a storied and complicated history, and we shouldn't forget that part of it.
French squatters. All right, folks, any questions on that? Oh, here we go.
Seems that we have just a little bit of time. Maybe you could provide a little bit of an update on where we are in the discussions and maybe a little bit of background as to why the discussions with the Department of National Defense.
Great question. In my first presentation, I talked about potential claims against the Crown in Alberta, and one of the bullet points was Cold Lake. Cold Lake is complicated. Another one of my bullet points was the rescinded Métis colonies. And there were, in fact, 12 Métis colonies that were established in 1938 under the Métis Population Betterment Act. 4 of them were taken away unilaterally by the province of Alberta. 2 of those were really close to here and were on land that later became the Cold Lake Air Weapons Range. The Cold Lake Métis Settlement, and I think Marlborough was the other one. I could have that one wrong. But there are some coincidences in history. The Cold Lake Métis Settlement, or Métis Colony, is rescinded, canceled by the province of Alberta a year before the Air Weapons Range is created. That land is under numerous claims, a lot of them by First Nations. It wasn't just on the Alberta side of the border that there were Métis people living on the lands that became the weapon range. In Saskatchewan, that weapons range is known as Primrose. And in fact, I think maybe 20 years ago, there was a settlement with the Métis families that were removed from the Primrose Air Weapons Range. But there has never been a settlement with the families or the descendants of those families or the nation that was removed from the Cold Lake side. And so one of the things that we have tried to do is to engage with the Department of Defense to seek some kind of settlement around that. It was on the framework agreement as a point to be addressed. It may not surprise you to learn that dealing with the Department of National Defense is incredibly difficult. They are very rigid. We hound and pester them. They don't reply very often. Finally, through a back channel, we learned that they weren't answering because they were afraid of us. And I thought to myself, they're the Army. How are they afraid of us? But progress on resolving that issue has been slow because there are so many overlapping legal disputes about it already. There was a settlement with the Cold Lake First Nation. There are other First Nations that have claims against the land. There's this claim. And so it may be the case that it can't be negotiated and that we have to go to court. We had really been working hard and desperately putting a lot of effort into establishing a policy to deal with Métis claims. There is currently a policy to deal with First Nations claims, the comprehensive claims policy, the specific claims policy. And so First Nations have a venue to engage with the federal government to resolve issues like this outside of the courts. Those options are not open to the Métis. We came very close to establishing a policy like that for the Métis this spring, so that's where our efforts in resolving the Cold Lake issue, along with some other issues, were going. Unfortunately, that was not successful. It's been kind of put on the back burner, so we need to go back to the drawing board and re-strategize how we deal with Cold Lake.
So Mr. Zachary. So I just want to give you a little history. If you go to Quebec, there's 5 overlapping agreements with all the First Nations. That's how they resolve their conflicts amongst the use of the land, their traditional territories. And so there's nothing stopping us from having an overlapping agreement with all the First Nations for that matter, because half of our people hunt and trap and fish together. So to say we don't use those lands together would be wrong. So it's up to you intelligent people to look at those agreements and figure out how then do we manage those pieces. So just wanted to tell you that because you said there's no such thing, and there is a number of those kind of agreements across Canada. On St. Paul de Métis, my family was from here. It was my uncle that burned that little seminary down that the priest had erected so they could have fun with the kids. That was their story. And so I know I'm being nasty about it, but really, old Sam Dumais told me that. He says, your uncle burned it down. We were all in that school, and they weren't called residential schools for us. They were whatever, seminaries or some kind of rectory for the Métis in this property here. And so what I think you need to do your research on is that they weren't put in here to necessarily farm. The Métis people had the majority of trap lines and owned these lands across this Western Canada. There wasn't a Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC. This was our territory. So they ran this land under the Northwest Fur Trading Company. This was their property. So now how do you then take these properties away from people other than sticking them some other area like St. Paul de Métis so that they can control them? And there's a whole bunch more to do the history on that. And there was a sign here that said St. Paul de Métis. So this was our lands. So the research needs to go on that. There's Linda Samagonis here who actually has books and materials and all the maps on this. So if anybody really wants to know about it, should talk to her. I can't find her. I was going to bring her and introduce you to her, but she is the historian here. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. All right, folks, like I said, we're willing to continue the conversation on anything related to Constitution, self-government. Feel free to step to a mic if you have any questions. If not, we can adjourn for the day and come back tonight to celebrate. Just going to find in the agenda what's happening at what time. All right, page 13. Curling rink jamboree open mic, 5:30 is doors open. Supper, 6:30 p.m. Magic show. Uh-oh. Hopefully nobody disappears. 7:30, and then 8:30 we got the band starting rock and fiddle for the jamboree and open mic. All right, and for tomorrow, what time do we start? So we start, breakfast is open at 7:30. Our procession begins at 9 a.m., but anybody who's in the flag raising and grand procession, please meet at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. All right, everybody, have fun, be safe. See you tonight. Marilyn. Oh, Ken Browning, he's on the microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a nice big hand to Aaron for the MC and a nice day today. He's done a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.